folks. Wanted to walk you through last week's rhetorical analysis a little bit. I thought we did a great job in our conferences, and I posted the notes for that as well. But I also know that many of you found it useful to go back and take a look at an essay that I wrote and to kind of have me walk through what my process looked like. And so I want to do that again for this week's rhetorical analysis. Again, I thought the one that we did over Garrison's piece was useful to navigate. I think this one's important too because in truth, I struggled to write this one a little bit, certainly more so than the Garrison piece. And many of you said the same, that you felt like you understood the text that you were supposed to read, but when it came down to writing it, you felt like you ran into kind of some sticking points. So I want to talk through what I did, as well as how I tried to work through those. If you have not actually read the essay yet, please take a few moments to go ahead and do so using that other document. Read it top to bottom so you know what's coming up, and then come on back and join us for this conversation. All right, so as we take a look at this, you'll notice that there are some similarities to the last one, as far as what I tried to do. But in case you didn't watch it, I'm going to do kind of a quick recap there. I want to go ahead and walk through what I tried to do in my introduction, pretty concise, what I tried to do in my body paragraphs, and then last but not least, my conclusion, which you'll notice is pretty gosh darn short because I was running out of time. So I went with the most essential, and so we'll kind of talk about that. As we come back up here to what I tried to do at the opening, I thought you folks did a great job in your discussions thinking about how Mary Fisher was in an interesting rhetorical situation. She didn't really embody the traits that most associated with HIV during the time period. And that's something that really asked a lot of us as readers to figure out. If we go back to the actual speech, we get a little bit here in that introductory part about HIV and AIDS, being an activist. But this is a 1992 speech. So I was 5. You all hadn't even been thought about yet. For us to be super aware of what it felt like during the time period to think about HIV and AIDS is a big ask. But through reading this intro stuff, and more importantly, reading through the speech, we're able to make some inferences about how people most likely thought about HIV and AIDS during the time period, especially people that might have been part of the Republican Party. We know that the Republican Party, especially for 1992, is going to be more conservative. And so Mary Fisher does not look or sound like what they, quote unquote, thought people with AIDS would look like. And yet, here she was, a woman, married, white, middle, upper class, who had HIV. And so that's an interesting rhetorical situation that she's in as she prepares to give that speech. I really wanted to try and capture that in my introduction, as well as the fact that so many people in her audience thought that that was an other people problem. So I took that idea and I took kind of the opening 3 sentences, similar to like what I did last time. I think this could be 1 to 3 sentences max, no longer than that. And I really tried to capture what was at the essence of Mary Fisher's argument, which is that when we see something as someone else's problem, when we see someone as an other, someone that's not us, there's some danger in that. There are some consequences to that. I thought that was a really important idea that we talked about. So that's what I tried to open up with here. Big idea. And so this is kind of similar to what you might come up with as an AP Lang style question for one of your notebooks. This idea of what are the consequences of viewing someone as another, or what are the dangers of stereotypes? Any of those could be really cool kind of introductory points to your actual essay. Once I've established that, that's where I go ahead and I transitioned into who my speaker is, as well as that audience. I don't really break down exactly what this looks like. The fact that it's going to be most likely older, whiter audience, certainly a more conservative audience. I get to that a little bit later, but I still establish just who that is, knowing I can get to it a little bit later. But I also want to draw your attention to my claim here. I didn't go with the 3-pronged thesis. Instead, I tried to just go with kind of a broader umbrella. So I said, in order to address and fight back against the growing HIV threat, so this is what she wants to see happen. And then how does she go about doing it? Fisher pleads for awareness and action from her party. So we kind of have our what and our why wrapped up here without a 3-prong attack. Now, as we prepare to look at the body paragraphs, a few of you said that one of your struggles was you felt like it was a good speech, but really she had just this one big purpose, and she kind of repeated that over and over. I think there's truth to that. So our job then is to take a look and say, how can we maybe split this up into thirds? Where might we see some shifts in this to go ahead and say, okay, that's the end of part one, that's the end of part two, here comes part three, and almost just kind of work your way in order of beginning, middle, end. Now, you don't always have to do your rhetorical analysis like that, but when you feel like you're struggling or you're stuck, keep it simple. Take a look at the first few paragraphs and answer, what is this person doing in the beginning? And of course, why? Why did he or she do it that way for that audience? Then identify something or a few things that happen in the middle. Why is it that that's the core of it right in the middle with that audience in mind? And then at the very end, why do those moments happen in the final few paragraphs with that audience in mind? So as we take a look, this first paragraph really focused on what happened early. I do link to something else that happens a little bit later. Whenever we can link, I think that's a great thing to do. But I really did focus on what she was trying to do early on. So one thing that she tries to do early is to undo this narrative of HIV being a disease of others. Connects up here. I address the audience and get more specific here, predominantly older white conservatives. And so one thing she tries to do early, many of you brought this up, she talks about how it is not a political creature. It does not care about race, age, ethnicity, sexual preference. None of those things matter to HIV or AIDS. They'll go after anyone. So why does she do that? Again, it's to undo this narrative. So I actually kind of put my why a little bit before and then brought that back down after. I linked it to this idea of, are you human? That great question that she poses from the perspective of HIV. And so I kind of took my reasoning here and brought that back down here as well. That this assertion that HIV is not a political creature, HIV only asks one thing, that kind of became my reasoning. So I still ended with that, but I also used it as a little bit of a lead in there, which is a little bit different. But the key is I'm ending with the why. That she's doing this early and she's doing it to try and unpack this idea or undo this idea that HIV is a disease of others. So she tries to do that early. Next, many of you brought up the fact that she held herself up as an example. I think that's an incredibly important moment to take on. So that's what I really wanted to use my second body paragraph for, thinking about that's kind of the next move she makes. First, she has this idea of it could get anybody, right? Like it's a human issue. Second, I'm a human. I'm someone impacted. And that's where I kind of went here. So she holds herself up as an example of someone with HIV, married, white, heterosexual. These are not traits that were associated with HIV at the time. So I've got some parallel structure leading into an M dash, right? I've got kind of like this mini list. But really, the goal here is to kind of establish this. Not traits that were associated with HIV, and yet she too is someone who tested positive. So now she's placing herself up here as an example. And she does that alongside a black infant struggling, as well as a lonely gay man, people who probably were not represented, being black, being gay, probably not represented at the 1992 Republican National Convention, at least not in a major spotlight way. So she pulls them up into the spotlight along with her. We thought that was a really important moment. So I tried to highlight that there. Because that was just one big moment, I didn't really link with anything else down here. I thought that moment pretty much stood on its own. And really what that ended up doing was allowing me once again to end with this idea of why does she do that? So if those at the RNC, as well as those watching at home, would not turn their backs on her, how can they turn their backs on anyone else? So now we're connecting that a little bit to purpose. Why did she do that? Because she's saying, if you don't turn your back on me, you can't do it to others. She's undoing that stereotype. And now we actually kind of have a build off of those first two body paragraphs. I struggled with kind of what I wanted to do for this last one. Some of you brought up the fact that she holds up President George H.W. Bush, the president at the time, as an example. I thought that was a really good moment. It's not one I wrote on, but many of you talked about why it is that she did that. I decided to focus on kind of how she ended the piece, which definitely it felt not like fear mongering. I don't think she was creating fear just for the sake of creating fear, but she really wanted to drive home this idea of it's a human issue. People like me are impacted. And then she ends by saying, and if you think you're safe, you are sadly mistaken, right? And so those pronouns really, I thought, were something important. But remember, no one is moved by pronouns themselves. But this idea of saying, if you believe you are safe, you are at risk, and then broadening out to we as a nation, I'm not talking about changing pronouns for the sake of changing pronouns. I'm kind of discussing the pronouns she used to really get at the heart of, if you hold on to these ignorances and these prejudices, if we hang on to these things in silence, each of us, including you, can be attacked. And then she broadens out here at the end, we are a nation at risk. This is not a liberal or conservative issue. This is not a gay or straight issue. This is a human issue. And I also tried to really reiterate this idea that she's speaking to her party. I thought that was really important. I didn't cite the line number, but she does specifically call them her party as almost like a reminder of, hey, before you let me go and say she's not one of us, let me remind you, I am one of you in every single layer that we can identify here. I think that that's really, really important. I was running out of time, so at the conclusion, you'll notice 2 sentences. Admittedly, second one's a little bit longer, but I really just tried to reemphasize what she set out to do, capture the danger of seeing an issue as one for others. And then I tried to capture kind of some of the moves that she made. But again, really, really kind of big picture here because I was running out of time. So as we look back over this, my goal was to kind of tackle the beginning, the middle, and the end, simply because I felt like I struggled to get going a little bit. I think if I had more time, I might change a few things around. But overall, as I look over it, I think that I was able to capture, 1, that I truly understood her purpose, 2, that I understood the rhetorical situation she was in, and 3, I was able to highlight some really impactful moments that cover the entirety of the selection we were given. And really, if we can do those big 3 things, then I think we're going to be in really good shape. So take a look at mine, take a look back at yours, do a little bit of comparing and contrasting, and of course, let me know your thoughts, and we'll give it another go this week with a brand new piece. Thanks, folks.